Hello and welcome. I'm Anand Naidu, sitting in for Riz Khan. On the show today, Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki. He came to power following a 3-decade struggle for independence and has been the leader of the East African nation since it gained independence 17 years ago. Don't forget, we want to include your views on the show, and you can reach us by email and SMS text, and those numbers are there at the bottom of your screen. Eritrea declared independence from Ethiopia in 1991, a move that was formally ratified in a referendum 2 years later. A subsequent border war with Ethiopia claimed more than 150,000 lives between 1998 and 2000. Although an agreement was signed, the issue continues to be a source of tension between the two countries, and the long-running border dispute remains unresolved. Joining me now from the Eritrean capital Asmara is President Isaias Afwerki. Mr. President, on the occasion of the country's 17th independence anniversary, in your view, what are the achievements of Eritrea?
Well, I would like to first of all start by saying the border dispute is resolved. It's not unresolved. The decision of the Boundary Commission 6 years ago, its decision to demarcate the border virtually and quit has closed the chapter. So I would say there is no border issue, there is no conflict, there is no tension in the first place. To come to your question, 17 years of achievement in this country has been to, first of all, rebuild the country that was devastated by a very long and destructive war, to start to build a nation, put in place an infrastructure, create an environment for development, promote social programs in education and health. 17 years, despite the challenge and obstacles, has been an exciting experience for this country and this nation. And we can talk about achievements, and that may take a long time, but I can assure you Eritrea has achieved remarkably in the economic sector, in the social sector, and we can now say we are embarking on a new era where we would be in a position to exploit the natural endowments and resources of this country to give more impetus for our developmental programs.
Okay, I want to talk about that, the exploitation of natural resources, a little later in the show, but I just want to get back to that border issue. Now, that agreement, which was agreed to by the Border Commission, has not been implemented, has it?
It is implemented. If you can understand what virtual demarcation means, virtual demarcation has closed the chapter. Our border is demarcated more than any other border within this continent, and you can assume that the border issue, the conflict, is resolved by this virtual demarcation.
Now, what are the chances of Eritrea normalizing relations with Ethiopia?
When our territory is occupied, despite the agreements, the decision given by the Boundary Commission, and now, as I indicated earlier, when we have the border demarcated virtually, the presence of occupation forces makes it impossible for any normalization of relationships.
There are concerns, and these concerns have been expressed in the United Nations, that there could be more fighting between Eritrea and Ethiopia.
This is mere speculation. Those who would like to distract the attention from the real issues would raise this matter time and again, but I don't see any ground for any eruption of tension or confrontation.
You know, I want to get to Eritrea's relationship with the United States. There have been accusations from the United States that Eritrea is a state sponsor of terrorism, that you support the Islamic insurgents in Somalia. Does that worry you?
How many times have we heard this, and how many lies have been told the last 5 or 8 years? And I think this is compromising. Again and again, the credibility of the administration in Washington, and these shameless lies repeated again and again have no weight whatsoever in what the United States, as far as Eritrea's linkage with terrorism, which has become an impossible fact to prove on the part of the United States, but you can hear these lies again and again, and I'm not surprised. We're not worried about these accusations.
But the United States has also said that it could label Eritrea a state sponsor of terrorism. That could have grave consequences for your country.
Not at all. No one is worried about these lies, baseless accusations, and you can imagine how many governments, countries, and individuals have been accused of linkage with terrorism when there are no facts on the ground. It's the same story as the weapons of mass destruction. It's the same pattern and trendy behavior we have witnessed all along, and no one in this country is worried about these accusations.
You know, one of the accusations from the United States is that Eritrea has supplied arms to the Islamic Courts Union in Somalia. Have you supplied arms to that group?
It looks like you're talking on behalf of the United States and the administration in Washington, and your list of questions seem to be provided by, I don't know, someone in Langley or the administration in Washington. I'm not bothered about these accusations. I can assure you these lies will be repeated again and again with no leverage on the ground.
Okay, let's talk about your recent visit to Iran. What did that trip achieve?
It's part of the long-standing relationship with the Islamic Republic of Iran. The early 60s, 70s, the present Islamic Republic of Iran and the support, the moral support, the struggle for liberation in this country got from the Iranian Revolution has been a landmark in the history of this country and bilateral ties with Iran, and there was nothing new in this relationship. We can imagine going back 3-4 decades when Ayatollah Khamenei was during Friday prayers praying for Eritrea and the freedom of Eritrea. And this visit comes as an expression of solidarity between Eritrea and Iran.
Did you sign any agreements with the Iranians?
Oh, about 3-4 agreements of cooperation.
And what are you going to be cooperating in what fields?
All fields: agriculture, manufacturing, mining, trade, name it.
Okay, now let's look at the domestic political situation in Eritrea. When are elections going to be held in Eritrea? There were elections scheduled for 2001. They didn't take place. When is that going to happen?
What elections?
Elections in Eritrea.
We'll see what the elections in the United States will bring about, and we will wait for about 3-4 decades until we see genuine natural situations emerge in Eritrea.
You're saying Eritrea is going to wait 3 or 4 decades before it holds elections?
Maybe more, who knows?
But isn't
that,
it...
of course, depending on what you call elections, what you believe in elections, what you think in terms of elections. If you think elections are elections we've witnessed in Ethiopia, the elections in Zimbabwe, the elections in Jordan, the elections in Morocco, the elections in Kuwait, if you talk about those elections and the elections in Iraq and the elections in Afghanistan, like the process where the lawyer Jirga was brought about to form a government, if you're talking about these types of elections, I can tell you it may never happen. It may take decades.
Well, aren't elections a central element of a democracy? And if you don't have elections, then you don't have a democracy.
It depends on what you mean by democracy. If you really understand what democracy means, and if you're talking about genuine elections, that's another issue. If you're telling me that the democracy and the elections we have witnessed the last 5 or 10 years promoted by the United States as a separate agenda to serve its interests in a number of regions of this world. I can tell you these are not elections for us. This is not democracy for us. If you mean democracy is polarizing society vertically, that's not democracy for us. And these days it become very fashionable for people to talk about democracy when society is divided and polarized along ethnic, religious lines, and we are not party to that kind of democracy.
Well, are you prepared to tolerate any kind of opposition in Eritrea?
What kind of opposition? Agents hired by the CIA from Langley, or opposition from inside, or any kind of opposition?
There was something of a crackdown against the opposition by the Eritreans, by your government in 2001. Journalists
Never, not at all. Not at all. You are disinformed. There has never been any opposition in this country. This is a total lie. And if you're talking about a political process, that is a different matter. If you're talking an opposition that has been fabricated and created by Langley, then you would call that an opposition. I would not call that an opposition.
Well, but you did close down the free press, and you know, just to get to some specifics, there were 2 Eritreans who worked for the U.S. Embassy in Asmara who were imprisoned. They have not been put on trial yet.
You're coming back again with the same list of questions provided to you by the State Department or the CIA, and you're trying to make this issue a political issue in the name of Al Jazeera International. I can assure you, freedom of press, if you mean the press that is financed by conglomerates in the world, financed by military industry in the world, if you think the financing and managing of media, the CNN, BBC, or even Jazeera International, by special interest groups is freedom of press, I can tell you we're not party to that kind of freedom of press.
All right. Well, you know, let's look at food aid in Eritrea. You adopted a policy some time ago of self-reliance. In fact, you kicked out most of the aid agencies in Eritrea, with the exception of a few that are still working there. Is Eritrea now self-sufficient in its food supply?
No, I wouldn't talk about that. Whether Eritrea is food self-sufficient or not is not the issue. If anyone is interested in providing food aid and handouts, give the 7 or 6 million children in Ethiopia the food aid you have, give the Somalis in the Ogaden the food aid you have, and anyone interested in providing aid could provide aid to the Somalis that are being suffocated and strangulated by the presence of occupation forces. We are not in a position to talk about food aid. We are not taking handouts. We advise those who are interested in trying to use aid as politics and go give that aid to places that need it.
But you have rejected millions of dollars in aid.
We don't want to be spoon-fed. We would like to live on our toil and be enabled to secure food for our people. That's what we do, and we don't want to be crippled by food aid that is linked to an agenda of dependency, and we've overcome this by denying and rejecting food aid intended for crippling us.
Mr. President, I can understand that you don't want to be spoon-fed, as you say. You want to be self-reliant, you want to be self-sufficient, but there are food shortages in Asmara.
Who told you that?
Well, we just had a report from the French news agency which says there are shortages of things like bread, that people have to use ration cards to get food from state stores, that there is a black market in food supplies.
This is another fabrication. Go and talk about food shortage in Egypt, food shortage in the United States. Ask people in the streets of the United States who are compromising, who are even sacrificing their breakfast, their dinner, or their supper because the food supplies there are not enough, because prices are going high. And we would like for those who are interested to address this issue, look otherwise. And people telling you that food shortage in Asmara are very unique under the circumstance, that would be a total fabrication.
Looking at the future of the Eritrean economy, there is a contract that you have signed with a Canadian company to exploit Eritrea's gold reserves. I want to look at an email that we received from one of our viewers in Connecticut here in the United States, and this is the email from Rahel Sebtu, and the email asks, you recently stated gold deposits in Eritrea were substantial and that production in the Bisha project would begin in 2009. How much gold are we talking about?
This is not a new discovery. The gold reserves in this country and reserves in other mineral resources have been discovered 70, 80 years ago by the Italian colonialists when they did a complete, a survey of the whole country. We're rediscovering. We're just preparing ourselves for exploiting these substantial resources of gold and other minerals. And at the moment, we're not talking about gold. We would not like to talk about this. We would like to, first of all, put in place a very solid basis and a foundation for the growth and development of our economy. Then comes gold and other resources.
When you talk about a solid basis and foundation for your economy, what are you talking about? Because I saw a World Bank report which says that the Eritrean army actually accounts for 11% of your workforce, of your labor force.
The World Bank can say anything. They can fabricate figures. We witnessed this happen not only in Eritrea but elsewhere. I wouldn't take World Bank figures seriously. We have a state of war. For the last 10 years, we've been involved. We've been forced to mobilize the majority of the young in this country. And that's a duty. We have to defend this country. And we're using that resource for putting in place a solid foundation for the economy of this country. If you have figures talking about 10%, 20% of our economy going to the army or to our defense, this could be a distortion of figures by the World Bank or other financial institutions of an agenda to tell the outside world that the economy is not healthy in this country.
When you talk about the mobilization of the country's youth, are you not concerned that there has been a major exodus of youth from Eritrea to other parts of the world?
Not at all. Think about the 10 million Mexicans who are crossing the Mexican border to the United States. Think about Africa from west to north to south, moving towards Europe. What do you call that? We don't have that kind of phenomenon in this country. There is an orchestrated sabotage to mislead people, to disinform young, to leave this country, and that is not happening. The numbers coming in the reports of a number of agencies of the United Nations are distorted figures. Nationals from other countries are said to be Eritreans, and that is a deliberate distortion of the reality of the youth in this country.
Okay, Mr. President, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for joining us.
You're most welcome.
And thank you for being with us. Riz Khan is back next week, and on Monday's show he gets an inside look at the oil trading industry. I'll see you soon. Street Talk is next.